In our lesson today, we're going to take a look at multiplying polynomials using two different methods. So last time we talked about multiplying polynomials using the distributive property. Today we're going to talk about multiplying using algebra tiles and also what we call the box or array method. These methods are going to be very similar, but one will be using algebra tiles where the other one will be done by hand, will be done on paper. So the way that we use algebra tiles is we're basically going to be multiplying these similar to the way that you would do a normal multiplication chart. So when we see we have, in this case, in this first example, we have x and then x plus 1 are our two terms. So basically one term is going to go along the vertical part of this multiplication t here, and then we'll have the other part being over here, the other binomial over here. So if I take a look, I'm going to go ahead and put an x on this side over here. So if you have actual algebra tiles, you can use them in this case. Typically, we're going to see green or sometimes even yellow representing the positive x value. The negatives are always going to be represented by red. So we would put one green rectangle over here. That's going to represent, again, our monomial here, x. And then we have x plus 1, which we would represent by one x tile. And then one unit tile. Once we do that, then we're basically going to fill in what we would see on the inside. So if you notice this first part where we have these two x terms, if I were to draw a line down here, if you notice what that's going to do is create a large square. So the large square is what is represented by x squared. Basically x by x, or x times x, which is x squared. And then if we look over here, you can see what we have left would be just a long rectangle. So that would be represented by an x, which I'd place there. So when you look at this, when we're trying to find our answer, what we notice is that we're looking what's inside of that t. So we see this is what we have as our product. Basically, this is going to be our answer, which we see is x squared plus x. And again, that's how we multiply with algebra tiles. The one thing that we will have to be careful with as we move forward is dealing with the negatives and then trying to figure out whether the product pieces should be positive or negative. But basically, you're just going to build a model with one of your terms on the left, the other term on the top, and then filling in what's going to make that product on the inside. Let's take a look at example 2. So we have 2x and then x minus 2. So we need two x's. We'll put down here on the left side. And also, I will say it doesn't matter which one you have on the left and which one you have on the top. You can kind of choose whichever one you want, or if you have more space on one side than the other, you can place that appropriately. Really doesn't matter as long as both of our terms are being represented. So here I have my two x's lined up along that line. On the top, I have x, and then since this is minus 2, we're going to want to use two negative tiles, which we would flip over to be the red ones. If you're drawing these on paper, you might want to either put a negative inside of those boxes, or if you want to use colors, you could do that, but we have to represent them as negative somehow. We then go ahead and fill in with whatever blocks are going to make this work. So you can see we'll have an x squared that fits here. We'll have another x squared that fits down here. And then what's going to end up fitting over here will be all x tiles. So here's where, again, we start to get a little bit tricky. We have to pay attention to. So notice for this part right here, we're going to be taking a positive times a negative. So that's going to give us a negative x as part of our product. And you'll see that'll be true with all these others here as well, because we're taking a positive times a negative. If we take a look at what we have left over then, what our product is, again, is everything inside here. So if you notice, we have two x squared tiles, which means we have 2x squared as part of our product. And then we have 4 negative x's, or in other words, negative 4x. And if you were to go back to what we did last class and you were to distribute and multiply through, you would see that if we have x times x, it's x squared, x times 1 is x, you're going to get that same expression down here. And over here, if you do 2x times x, you get 2x squared. 2x times negative 2 would be negative 4x. So you can kind of use both methods to double check and make sure that you're doing it correctly. All right, so let's take a look at the next two. I'm going to get them set up with the algebra tiles, and then I'm going to show you kind of an easy way to draw in the product piece on the inside. Then all we'll need to do is worry about whether they're positive or negative, but really it is then pretty easy to draw when we look at it that way. So this one we have x times 2x plus 2. Since I have more space here on the left, I'm actually going to represent the 2x plus 2 over on the left here instead of the x. So this, again, is going to represent the 2x plus 2. And you can see even here, even though that is my longer side, I'm still going to run out of space. That's okay. I'll just write the answer below that when we're all done. And then my other term is an x, so that's going to go along the top here. So like I said, without using algebra tiles, I'm going to show you an easy way to basically fill this in. So if you look at the outside part of your product and you just draw a line straight down and straight across. Basically what you can do to fill in the middle is if you draw a line from all of your blocks or that all of your tiles create, you'll basically then get your product. So in between the two x's here, and draw a line straight across. In between the x and the 1, draw a line straight across. And then in between the two 1s, we can draw a line straight across. And that's really going to then kind of allow you to see what you have, because notice that these are big squares, which means they're x squared tiles. These are rectangles, which means they're x tiles. And since everything in this case is positive, all of those values are going to be positive. So then when I look at the final product, when I combine all these like terms, we should end up with a final answer of 2x squared plus 2x. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Next one, first of all, we have a negative x. So we want to make sure that we're using a red x or a red rectangle for that one. And then we have a positive x minus 3. So again, because of that negative, we're going to make, or sorry, because of that minus, we're going to make those 3 1 tiles negatives. So at this point, you could either use the algebra tiles or you could just draw in the product, what you have left over. I'm just going to go ahead and draw that product in here. So get my border in, and then I'm just going to draw lines where all the tiles are separated. So you can see I'd be left with an x squared tiled here. I'd have an x here, an x here, and an x here. Now, since this problem does deal with some negatives, we do have to kind of pay attention to the sign of those individual pieces. So if I look at the x squared, I have a positive times a negative. So I know based on my multiplication rules that that's going to need to be a negative x squared. With our x's over here on the right, we're taking a negative times a negative. So we have a negative here times a negative here, which should give us a positive answer. So this should be a positive x. Here we have a negative times a negative, so it should be a positive x. Negative times a negative should be a positive x. So those are all going to end up being positive there. We can then look at our final product, which we have negative x squared. And then since I have 3 positive x's, we have plus 3x. All right, so that was all multiplying a monomial times a binomial. This does work with other polynomials as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the back where we'll deal with some slightly more complicated polynomials. Here we're going to talk about just multiplying binomial times binomial. We don't deal with exponents of 2 when we're talking about multiplying polynomials. So you're typically not going to see any types of trinomials in these algebra tile problems. They're all going to typically be monomials and binomials. So let's take a look. We have 2x plus 1 and then x plus 1. So I'm going to model that first expression over on the left, the 2x plus 1. And then on the top, we have x plus 1. We can fill in with algebra tiles or draw the borders and draw the lines. Either way, I'll go ahead and use algebra tiles here for this one. So we'll have 1x squared there. Another x squared will fit in there. We'll have some rectangles that fit in here. So basically, you're just trying to fill this up with all of the correct tiles that actually make it work. There really is only one way to do this correctly. If you actually use the algebra tiles, you'll notice that basically you can't fit a certain number of these 1 tiles into an x tile. So there's really only going to be one way that you can fill this in correctly. The one thing you do have to pay attention with this is notice that we do still have a gap down here that we need to fill. This whole part needs to be filled in. So we're going to need to put, in this case, a 1 tile, because that I get from doing 1 times 1. So when we look at it, we can see our final product is going to be all these tiles here combined. So our final answer for this is going to be 2x squared. Now we have 1, 2, 3x tiles, so plus 3x, and then plus 1. And again, we could confirm that by distributing, like we learned last class, or using the FOIL method, which we talked briefly about last class as well. Let's take a look at the next one. And then I'll have you guys try those last two kind of on your own. This one, I know I'm going to run out of space because I have negative 3x and having trouble fitting 2. But let's go ahead and let's try to get that in there. And plus 2. In the top, I have negative x minus 2, so we need negatives. All right, then we'll fill in. So again, key part here is going to be recognizing what the sign should be. So in this first section up here, we have a negative times a negative, which should give us a positive x squared. Have a negative and a negative again here, which should give us a positive x squared. And again, a negative times a negative give us a positive x squared there. We look over here, we're going to have rectangles that fill these spaces. So we know they're going to be x's. And if you notice, you're going to be doing negative times negative for all these. So these are all turned positive over here. If I come down to the bottom here, so it's running off my screen a little bit. Let me zoom out. How about that? All right, so what we're seeing is we have a positive times a negative. So those down there are going to be negative x's because we're taking a positive times a negative. So the product would be negative. Down here, we're going to be using 1 tiles. Notice that we'd be doing a positive times a negative. So these down here are all going to be negative because for all of them, we'd be doing a positive times a negative. So if we take a look, once we get that all filled in, we look at our final product here. This one we do have a little bit more that we kind of need to think about. So x squareds, notice that we have 3x squareds. The part where we have to think about is the fact that we have some x's that are positive over here. We have some that are negative. So we have to think about zero pairs and remember that a positive and a negative will cancel each other out. So basically 2 of these will cancel out, which would leave us with 4 positive x tiles. So we have plus 4x. And then we have 4 negative 1 tiles, so minus 4. All right, so what I want you to do now is go ahead and try those last 2 on your own. I'm going to take away all that stuff up there above and go ahead and pause the video and then check your answers once you are done. So for number 7, you should have gotten 2x squared minus 7x minus 4. And for number 8, you should have come up with negative 4x squared minus 2x plus 1. So this is an intro to solving using algebra tiles. This is not typically going to be the way that we solve them because we do have some faster, and in my opinion, easier ways to solve. But this is a good visual, good concrete way of solving these types of polynomials. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.